For as long as I can remember, ever since I was a small child, I remember being enthralled and fascinated with ancient Greece. Not the mythology, but the real-life historical events that would take place. Stories such as the Battle of Thermopylae, and the 300 brave men that would fight alongside King Leonidas in the Hot Gates. Hearing and learning about these stories of ancient Greece, being a boy growing up in a very modern, civilized world, I was very grateful to be living in such lavish times, with such modern conveniences, never having to use a sword. I had such respect for the men that lived in 480 BC. This is the story of King Leonidas 300 and the Battle of Thermopylae in ancient Greece.
What is going on, guys? Welcome back to Talking Movies. I realize it has been a hot minute since I've done one of these, but I watched this movie just a couple nights ago and I knew it was time to get back to doing some Talking Movies. And let me tell you, I remember when this movie came out in 2007, I was very, very excited. I remember being with my ex and hearing about this movie coming out, and I was very excited. I just wouldn't shut up to her about this movie because in the early 2000s, I fell down the rabbit hole of reading just about everything I could read in ancient Greece. I'd look up one story that would lead to another story. Before long, hours would pass in me just reading about these events. Now, my big interest in this movie was how close they would stick to the historical events of the Battle of Thermopylae and the Brave 300. Well, Frank Miller, in his graphic novel brought to life by Zack Snyder and starring Gerard Butler as King Leonidas, also having a young Michael Fassbender, they stuck to the story pretty damn good. I gotta be honest. They didn't stray off the beaten path that much, and they stuck pretty well true to the accurate events. Now, this did take place in 480 BC. Now, King Leonidas himself would reign for 10 years as king in Sparta before his obvious demise. And now that was one of the fun things about going into this movie, is that I knew the outcome. I knew exactly how everything was going to take place, and that was what was really fun for me to see how they would bring it to life. And they brought it to life really well. Now, I know at the time, this movie was mostly well received. It did take some heavy criticisms for its slowed down action scenes, which actually I quite enjoy because no other movies really followed suit with this and copied it, which I was happy to see. If you think back and remembering to The Matrix and some of the graphics they used in The Matrix, a lot of movies would copy that and play on that. Nobody really did that with 300, and I'm really happy because it stuck true to this film and makes it very unique and very memorable for what it did at the time. Yes, a little bit corny and a little bit cliche at times. Some people criticize the film for having spray-on abs and, muscle definition on some of the people, but with the lighting and colors they use, it still looks fantastic. And truth be told, most of the guys were in pretty good, healthy shape to begin with, so they just sort of capitalized on that and airbrushed a little extra muscle in to just make it look that much cooler, lamer. I guess that's for you to decide. For me, this movie is an action-packed thrill ride from start to finish. It's also very emotional. So without any further ado, I just want to jump in and check out a few scenes that really stuck with me, some things that make me laugh, some things that almost make me cry. Because honestly, when I think about the actual heroics, the bravery of some of these men, it really makes modern-day men look like absolute bitches.
Madness. This is Sparta!
Okay, so seeing as I'm talking about the movie 300, was there any doubt that I wasn't going to include that scene? Now, there's a couple things that come to mind when I look at that scene, and I don't want to make it too long-winded, but a part of me thinks is like, doesn't somebody have to go down there and get the bodies that fall in the well? Aren't they concerned about the blood and guts that are going to contaminate their well and their water? Maybe I'm reading a little too much into it, but I tell you, it does make for a pretty awesome looking scene.
Into the hot gates we march. Into that narrow corridor we march. Where Xerxes' numbers count for nothing. Spartans, citizen soldiers, freed slaves, brave Greeks all. Brothers, fathers, sons, we march.
Okay, something I want to talk about now is just my love for the ancient Greece and the stories that were told. Again, it's really hard for me to believe that these were actual factual stories, that there were people so barbaric, brave, and crazy enough to engage in these kinds of battles. You would think that lifespans were pretty short, but Leonidas got killed in his early 40s. Xerxes actually got assassinated in his late 50s. Xerxes was the son of Darius the First. Xerxes would also father his son, Darius II. Now, there's a lot of neat, amazing historical events that you can learn about and read about. And again, one of my biggest interests were they going to do the Battle of the Sea of Aegea? Because eventually I knew that the Greeks were going to prevail and win this war. And watching this movie, I didn't know how long they were going to go on with it, because this war, yes, was small and fought by 300, but it would go on and continue into a bigger war of all of Greece facing the massive Persian army.
1,000 nations of the Persian Empire descend upon you. Our arrows will blot out the sun.
Then we will fight in the shade.
1,000 nations of the Persian Empire descend upon you. Our arrows will block out the sun.
Makes me laugh every time. There's just something I love about overacting, probably why Nicolas Cage is so popular. It's just funny, man, and it's very emotional as well. It's a little bit ridiculous, but let me tell you a real life story about a job I used to work in a grocery store working night shift. Now, you're probably wondering, how does this tie into 300? Okay, so we would work night shift. We'd rip open the boxes. We'd throw the boxes into the aisles, and halfway through our shift, we would grab all the boxes and pile them at the front in the bin. We would do this once more, and by the time the morning would reach and the sun would rise, our boxes would block a window, like a 100-foot long window, 8 feet high by 100 feet, enormous window. And normally the sun would shine in. And when this movie came out, I always laughed at how he said, arrows will block out the sun. So every morning I couldn't help it, because our boxes would literally block out the sun, just covering the entire window. I know it's kind of stupid to include that story, but I thought it'd be kind of fun.
To the cliff!
Okay, so I don't know if it's all that important that I bring up this part, because I'm sure many of you know about it. And this isn't a review. It's just simply talking movies and talking about parts in the film. Now, in this film, there's a particular short, hunchback, grotesque, odd little creature who gets rejected by King Leonidas when he asks to fight alongside the Spartans. He has a shield, he has the helm, he has the sword and spear, something passed down to him from his father, but he is a genetic defect, and Leonidas politely tells him that he cannot use him. Obviously feeling rejected, he runs to the other side of the army. Reminds me of some other things in the retro gaming community that happen once in a while. Anyways, he runs over to King Xerxes. He tells Xerxes about the hidden goat path that can infiltrate the Hot Gates and eventually lead to the demise of the 300. Leonidas sends a good portion of the army back to Greece, back to Sparta, so they all don't die. And he leaves 300 to stand and fight. And he asks them to share the story. The amazing thing is that I sit here in 2021 talking about this story, talking about King Leonidas. His story definitely lived on.
Let me guess. You must be Xerxes.
I will erase even the memory of Sparta from the histories. Every piece of Greek parchment shall be burned. Every Greek historian and every scribe shall have their eyes put out and their tongues cut for their mouths, while uttering the very name of Sparta or Leonidas will be punishable by death. The world will never know you existed at all.
It might not be a huge action-packed scene, but for me, it's one of the best scenes in the entire film. The two kings coming together and having a very in-depth conversation about where they go from here. Does Leonidas kneel before the king god? Of course not. And as he is defiant towards him, and it absolutely drives Xerxes crazy, he lashes out and claims that the name Leonidas will never be remembered, that the 300 will never be remembered. and the Spartans will not be remembered. Well, Xerxes, you were dead wrong, my friend. The history books would be written, and his name would live on. And to me, that is one of the most amazing parts of this story and this movie. That few stood against many, and a god king would bleed.
They fall by the hundreds. We send the severed bodies and the fragile hearts back to Xerxes' feet.
Okay, guys, so it's at this time that I'm going to conclude this Talking Movies. And I'm going to get to one of the final scenes, and probably my favorite scene in the whole movie. Now, I do find this scene pretty emotional because when you look in Gerard Butler's eyes, his acting in this scene is actually exceptional, in my opinion. You can just see the redness, the bloodshot eyes, the tears overcoming him as he delivers a message to send back to the queen. He only grabs a necklace and hands it. And he says, "You have a message for the queen." He says, "None that needs spoken." But as he stands there with arrows in his chest, bleeding out and dying, in his last breath, he just calls for his queen, calls for his wife. And I just think it's an emotional scene. I really do think this is a very powerful scene. And it just goes to show exactly what he said he was going to do, that he'd fight to his last breath, never surrender, foolish or not. It just makes for an amazing story, an amazing scene. So let's just check out that final clip, guys. And with that being said, I want to thank you all for watching this episode of Talking Movies. I encourage you to jump in the comments and let me know your thoughts of this movie. Even if you don't like it, feel free to let me know what you didn't like about it, but you'll never change my opinion about it. I absolutely love this movie. And like I said, rewatching it just a couple nights ago, it was just as good now than it was back in the theaters in 2007.
His roar is long and loud.
It's an honor to die at your side.
It's an honor to have lived at yours.
My queen! My wife. My love.
Okay, guys, so I realized I already said goodbye. I realized I told you to jump into the comments. But looking at the raw emotion in Gerard Butler's eyes in that final scene just made me want to get back on camera and say, thank you very much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate you watching. There's something to be said about when you watch a film and not seeing it for many, many years. Sometimes you rewatch it and you think, meh, that's not as good as I remember. And sometimes you rewatch films and you end up liking them more than you initially did. That's what happened with me when rewatching this film. And sometimes less is more, and taking breaks from watching things can definitely increase your experience and your love for something. But like art, whether it's music, video games, or movies, it is subjective. And everyone's opinion is different. The audience score on Rotten Tomato was very, very high, but the critics gave it a very mediocre score. Myself, I don't give a crap what anybody thinks. I'm giving it a 5 out of 5. Thanks again for watching.
The world will know that free men stood against a tyrant, that few stood against many. And before this battle was over, that even a god king can bleed.